In 1956, a journalist named Sergio Porto walked into a parking lot in Ipanema, one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in Rio de Janeiro, and noticed a man washing cars for tips. The man was 48 years old. His clothes were worn. He looked like someone the city had forgotten a long time ago. But Sergio Porto recognized him, because 20 years earlier, this same man had co-founded one of the most legendary samba schools in Brazilian history, had written songs that Carmen Miranda and Francisco Alves had turned into national hits, and had been considered one of the finest musical minds in Rio de Janeiro. His name was Angenor de Oliveira. Everyone called him Cartola, and for over a decade, most of the samba world had assumed he was dead. He wasn't dead. He was washing cars. And what happened next is one of the most extraordinary comeback stories in the history of recorded music. Because 18 years after Sergio Porto pulled him off that parking lot, Cartola, at the age of 65, recorded his first solo album. 2 years after that, he wrote a song called As Rosas Nao Falam. Today it is the 11th most re-recorded song in Brazilian history, with over 246 registered versions. He didn't just come back. He came back and wrote some of the greatest poetry the Portuguese language has ever produced. Brazilian music runs deeper than almost any tradition on earth. It invented bossa nova, shaped jazz, influenced funk, and built an entire carnival civilization out of rhythm and storytelling. I've been mapping these stories for years, and most of them have never been told in English. If you want in, subscribe and come along. To understand Cartola, you have to start on a hillside. In 1919, when Angenor was 11 years old, his family lost their home in the Laranjeiras neighborhood and moved up to the Morro da Mangueira, one of Rio's oldest favelas, a community perched on a steep green hill overlooking a train station. That hill would define his life. He lost his mother at 15, dropped out of school, and fell into the street life of the Morro, picking up guitar, learning samba from the older men who gathered on corners and doorsteps, and eventually working as a bricklayer to survive. He got his nickname from the hat he wore on construction sites. In Portuguese, a cartola is a top hat. He wore one to keep cement dust out of his hair. The name stuck because it fit. There was something dignified about him, even when he was covered in plaster. By his late teens, Cartola was already the most respected musical voice on the hill. In 1925, he and his friend Carlos Cachaça organized a carnival bloco called the Arengueiros. 3 years later, on April 28, 1928, they expanded it into something much bigger, a proper samba school called Estação Primeira de Mangueira, First Station of Mangueira. The name came from geography. It was the first stop on the Central Railway line where you could hear samba. The colors, green and pink, were Cartola's choice. He was 19 years old. He had just co-invented one of the building blocks of modern Brazilian culture. Through the 1930s, Cartola's compositions spread across Rio like wildfire. Some of the biggest voices in Brazil were recording his songs. Carmen Miranda, Francisco Alves, Aracide Almeida, Silvio Caldas. These were the superstars of Brazilian radio in its golden age. But here is the part that explains everything that came after. Cartola never saw a fraction of the money. The music industry of the 1930s worked on what you might call the pay and forget model. You sold a song outright, someone famous recorded it, and your name either appeared on the label or it didn't. Cartola kept composing, kept living on the hill, kept working odd jobs, and watched his melodies become hits without his life changing at all. Then the 1940s hit, and he fell apart. He contracted meningitis. He spent 3 days in a coma and a year on crutches. Humiliated by his condition, he left Mangueira and moved to Nilópolis, a city on the outskirts of Rio, with his first wife, Deolinda. Then Deolinda died of a heart attack. He was alone, sick, broke, and completely disconnected from the world that had once sung his songs. He stopped composing. He stopped playing. He drifted through a series of invisible jobs: night watchman, painter, handyman. For the samba world of Rio de Janeiro, Cartola had simply vanished. That is the state Sergio Porto found him in, a ghost, washing cars in Ipanema. Porto, who was a well-known columnist and humorist writing under the pen name Stanislaw Ponte Preta, immediately brought Cartola back to the radio, got him singing again, and reconnected him with the world he had been erased from. It was a resurrection, and it got personal fast. Back on the Morro da Mangueira, Cartola reconnected with Eusebia Silva do Nascimento, Dona Zica, a woman he had known for decades, the sister-in-law of his old friend Carlos Cachaça. They began living together in 1953, married formally in 1964, and became one of the most beloved partnerships in the history of Brazilian music. Cartola wrote the samba Nós Dois for their wedding. In September 1963, the couple opened a bar and restaurant at Rua da Carioca 53 in the heart of downtown Rio. They called it Z Cartola, Z for Zica, Cartola for himself. Dona Zica cooked, Cartola played, and within weeks, every serious sambista in Rio was passing through. Nelson Cavaquinho, Ismael Silva, Zequete, Clementina de Jesus, Elizeth Cardoso. The bar became sacred ground. It was at Z Cartola that a young, unknown musician named Paulinho da Viola first performed in public. It was at Z Cartola that Samba's old guard met the new generation that would carry the music forward. The bar only lasted 20 months. It closed in May 1965, done in by bad finances. But in that brief window, it became one of the most important music venues in Brazilian history. And then, finally, at the age of 65, Cartola walked into a recording studio and made the album the world had been waiting 4 decades for. The year was 1974. The album was simply called Cartola. It was acoustic, intimate, almost conversational. His voice weathered and gentle, his guitar playing spare, every lyric carrying the weight of a man who had lived more life than most people could imagine. The critics treated it like a revelation. It was. 2 years later came a second album, and on it were 2 songs that would become monuments of the Portuguese language. O Mundo é um Moinho, The World is a Mill, was a song he had actually written in 1943 for his adopted daughter Creusa, warning her about the cruelty of adult life. He had carried it in his head for over 30 years before anyone heard it on a record. As Rosas Nao Falam, The Roses Don't Speak, was inspired by Dona Zica's garden. The story goes that Cartola gave her rose seedlings, and one morning she opened the door and found them blooming. He wrote a song about it. It is quiet, simple, devastating, and it has been recorded by over 246 artists since. According to Brazil's royalty collection agency ECAD, it is the most played and most recorded song in Cartola's catalog, and one of the most re-recorded in the entire history of Brazilian music. He finally gave his first solo concert in 1978. He was 70 years old. He had written more than 500 songs. On November 30th, 1980, Cartola died of cancer at the age of 72. At his funeral the next day, a Mangueira drummer named Waldemiro, a man Cartola had taught to prepare the leather on his drum, beat out the rhythm while a crowd of sambistas, friends, politicians, and intellectuals sang As Rosas Nao Falam one last time in the open air. It was what Cartola had asked for. What stays with me about Cartola is not the sadness, though there is plenty of it. It is the stubbornness of the music itself. He spent decades in poverty and silence, decades when the songs had every reason to die. They didn't. They waited inside him. And when the moment finally came, at an age when most careers are long over, they poured out like they had been written yesterday. Mangueira, the school he co-founded at 19, still parades every carnival in green and pink. His songs still play in every bar, every Roda de Samba, every corner of Brazil where people gather to sing. Cartola washed cars for years. He built walls for years. And then he sat down with a guitar at 65 and recorded the proof that some things are simply too beautiful to disappear. If this story hit you the way it hit me, there are dozens more like it in Brazilian music, and I'm telling all of them on this channel. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and I'll meet you in the next one.